There is a man in this story who won every war he was ever given, and when the last enemy fell, the light went out of his eyes, and he was walked to the edge of the world and told not to come back. Nobody accused him of failing. He had finished, and finishing was the problem. He had a name before any of this, an older, rougher name from a country that the Golden Land never bothered to learn the geography of. He set that name down to marry a god, and he carried her law across the whole world on his back, and when the god had no further use for him, he picked the old name back up and he waited. He waited a very long time. Tonight we are going to follow him the entire way, out of the Badlands and into the throne room. Through every war that built the world you already know, the storm, the giants, the ones the histories do not bother to name, down into a sewer beneath the capital where two of his children were hidden because of the shape they were born in, out through a gate that closed behind him, and at the very end of the night back again to the foot of the great golden tree on the evening he came home to collect what he was owed. There is one idea underneath all of it, and I want you to hold on to it because the whole night turns on this. Grace is not love. Grace is employment. You do not have to stay awake for any of this. If you drift off somewhere in the first chapter, you will have got exactly what you came for, and the story will carry on in the dark, which is where most of it happened anyway. And if you stay up with me the whole way, that is welcome too. I will still be here, chapter by chapter, all the way to the last one. So get comfortable. Let the pillow take the full weight of your head. Let your shoulders come down away from your ears, and let your breathing go slow and even, and we will start where he started, which is a very long way from anywhere golden. Chapter 1, The Man from Outside. Before he was a lord, before he was a legend, before the golden light touched him at all, he was a chieftain in a country the lands between considered barely worth the ink. The Badlands, that is the whole name. Not a kingdom, not a realm, not a holy region with a capital and a lineage and a color scheme. A hard, open country, somewhere beyond the borders of the world this game takes place in, and the man who led its warriors was called Hoarah Loux. Let's sit with the shape of that word for a moment. Chieftain. It's not king, and it is not lord, and the difference matters enormously. A king inherits, a lord is granted. A chieftain is simply the one who wins, over and over, in front of everyone, until nobody can think of a reason to follow anyone else. There is no ceremony holding that position up. There is no bloodline making it legitimate. There is only the ongoing fact of him standing while other people are not. That is the man the lands between imported. We know almost nothing else about the Badlands, and I want to be honest with you about that, rather than filling the silence with invention. The game gives us a handful of words: a homeland, a title, a people who followed him, a march that ended somewhere else. That is close to the sum of it. There are no ruins you can visit that belong to his country. There are no statues of its heroes standing in the beautiful places. There is no cathedral, no academy, no grand library holding its history. What I find quietly devastating about that is how completely it worked. An entire homeland, an entire people, the whole first half of a man's life, and it survives inside the world's memory as a few lines of small text on the back of the things he carried. The lands between did not destroy the Badlands. It simply declined to record them. Hold that thought, because it is going to happen to him too, eventually, in a slower way. What we can say about him comes through the way he fought, and here the game is generous, because the way he fought is written into half a dozen objects scattered across the world. He carried a great golden axe. He fought barehanded when the axe was not enough, or when the axe was not the point. He wore his hair long and loose, and his beard heavy, in a world of polished helms and gilded masks and faces that were never once seen. Every other figure of power in this story hides behind something. Marika behind the tree, Radigan behind Marika, Morgoth behind a cloak. Godfrey wore his own face, and it was the face of a man who had been outside in weather for most of his life. And there is one detail about him that the item text keeps returning to, and I want you to remember this phrase, because we are going to come back to it twice more before the night is over, and the second time will mean something completely different than it does right now. He never took a backward step. That is how it is recorded. Not that he was brave, not that he was strong, not that he was undefeated, though all of those things are true. The detail that survived him is a detail about direction. Forward, always, in every fight, into every enemy, without exception, without hesitation, and without the small human instinct that keeps most people alive, which is the instinct to back away from a thing that can kill you. Right now, that sounds like glory. It is written as glory. It is the kind of line that gets carved on a monument. Remember it anyway. By the end of tonight, it is going to sound like a diagnosis. Sleep well. Next, we follow him out of his own country, and we watch him walk into ours. Chapter 2, The Long March. Welcome back. Let your breathing slow down, and let the bed take your weight properly. He did not arrive in the lands between. He marched into it. The march has a name, which is unusual, because most of the movements of armies in this world do not. It is called the Long March, and he is remembered as its lord. Somewhere out beyond the edges of the map, a chieftain gathered the warriors of a hard country and walked them across whatever lies between there and here, and the walk was long enough and hard enough that the walking itself became the thing he was known for. Think about the practicalities of that for a moment, because the practicalities are where the sadness usually hides in this game. They did not have grace, not yet. The golden light that guides every step you take in this world, that shows you where to go and marks you as belonging, that was not theirs. They were outsiders in the truest sense, moving through a country that ran on a light they had never been given. Whatever they knew about the Erd tree, they knew from a distance, the way you know about a mountain in a neighboring country. Enormous, gold, visible from impossibly far away, and nothing to do with you. And they walked toward it anyway. I like to sit with the picture of that for a while, because it is the last completely peaceful image in his entire life, and the game never shows it to us. A column of people moving across open country, cookfires at night, and the same faces around them for months. Children born on the road who would never see the place their parents were describing. Old men who had followed this chieftain when he was young and who were now being carried. And out ahead of all of them, walking, not riding, a man with an axe and long loose hair, who had never in his life been given anything he did not take, leading his entire world toward a light that belonged to somebody else. None of them had grace. That is the part I keep returning to. Everything they achieved in the Golden Country, every war they won, the whole age they made possible, was begun by people the light had not yet touched, walking anyway. And the light, when it finally reached them, turned out to be alone. I do not know what they were told they would find. The game does not say. It is possible they came as conquerors and were absorbed. It is possible they were invited. It is possible they were simply moving, the way people move when their own country has stopped feeding them, and the light on the horizon was as good a direction as any. All three readings are available, and the text does not close any of them off, and I would rather leave that door open than pretend I know which side of it we are standing on. What is certain is the outcome. The warriors of the Badlands entered the lands between, and their chieftain did not end up as a curiosity at the edge of somebody's court. He ended up at the center of everything. He ended up married to the god. That is an extraordinary jump, and the game never explains the middle of it, which is exactly the kind of gap this world loves to leave. One line tells you he came from outside. Another line tells you He was the first Elden Lord. Between the two, there is a silence roughly the size of a life. What we can do is look at what the lands between needed at that moment, and the answer is uncomfortable, and it is the beginning of the argument this whole video is making. The Golden Order was new. A young god had climbed onto a throne and hung a law on a tree, and that law had to be made true across an entire continent full of older powers who had no reason to agree to it. Dragons held the sky, giants held the mountains, storm and stone and rot and older, stranger things held everything in between. A new order does not become the truth because it is written down beautifully. It becomes the truth because somebody goes out and makes every alternative stop existing. The Golden Order needed a war, and the god at the center of it, the one who would be worshipped, the one whose image would go on the walls, and the coins and the prayers, could not be the one covered in the blood of it. She needed a man from outside. Rest now. Next, we go and meet the woman on the throne and find out what she was actually looking for. Chapter 3: The Woman Who Needed a Lord. You are still here. Good. Let everything slow down. Queen Marika the Eternal had a problem, and it was not a small one. She had become a god, or been made into one, depending which part of the world's own account you trust, and she had bound a law into the Elden Ring and hung the whole arrangement inside a tree that could be seen from every horizon. That is the founding image of this world: gold light, a law, an eternal queen, a promise of order. But a law is only a suggestion until something enforces it, and a god, in this world, cannot be the enforcer. That is the constraint the whole system runs on, and once you notice it, you cannot stop seeing it. The god embodies, the god sanctifies, the god sits inside the tree and is worshipped. Somebody else does the killing. That somebody is called the Elden Lord. I want to be precise about this title because almost everybody on first playthrough gets the shape of it slightly wrong, and the wrong shape makes the ending of tonight's story much harder to feel. Elden Lord is not a king. It is not a separate throne beside hers. It is a consort's title. It exists in relation to her, it is granted through her, and it is held at her discretion. The Lord is the one who stands beside the god and does the part of godhood that involves violence. Every scrap of authority the position carries is borrowed, and the lender is standing right there. You are told this, incidentally, by the game's own structure. Your entire journey, everything you do across 100 hours, is a campaign to become Elden Lord, and when you finally reach the end of it, you find that the throne you fought your way to is a chair beside somebody else's, in a room that belongs to a tree. So, a new god, an unenforced law, a continent of older powers, and a vacancy for somebody willing to go and make the law true. And into this walks a chieftain from outside with a golden axe, a country nobody has heard of at his back, and no ties whatsoever to any of the older powers he is going to be asked to destroy. That last part is not a coincidence, and I think it is the single most important thing to understand about how he was chosen. Consider who else was available. The lands between was full of great houses, ancient bloodlines, sorcerers with academies, knights with lineages, all of them tangled up with each other by marriage and history and debt. Hand the sword to any of them, and you have handed it to somebody who has cousins on the other side of every war. Somebody who will hesitate. Somebody who has an opinion about which of the old powers really deserves to be wiped away. Hand it to the outsider, and there is no hesitation anywhere as in the arrangement. He has no cousins here. He owes nobody. Every enemy the Order names is simply an enemy, cleanly, with no history attached to complicate it. He was not chosen, despite coming from nowhere. He was chosen for it. And this is where I want to plant the idea properly, because we are going to be living with it for the next 2 hours. When you look at the marriage of Marika and Godfrey, you are looking at the founding love story of the Golden Order, the union at the center of the world, the golden pair whose children became the demigods. That is one true reading, and I am not going to take it from you. Here is the other true reading, sitting right beside it, using the same evidence. A god with a law that could not enforce itself acquired a man who could enforce it, from a place with no ties to anything, and gave him a title that could be withdrawn. Grace is not love, grace is employment. Sleep well. Next, he sets down his own name and takes hers. On chapter 4, the name he set down. Wherever you drifted, this is a good place to come back to. Settle back in and let your jaw unclench. Hoarah Loux became Godfrey. That sentence looks small on the page. I want to slow it down because it is one of the quietest and most complete acts of erasure in this entire world, and the game presents it as a promotion. Names in the lands between are not decoration, they are status reports. Radigan and Marika, one being with two names, and the doubling is the mystery at the center of everything. Morgoth, who was born with one name and given another, and who kept the second one over the first when he chose to defend the city that hated him. The Tarnished, a people defined by a word that describes a change in their light. In this world, when a name changes, something has been done to somebody. So a warrior chieftain from beyond the map crossed into the Golden Country, married its god, and was given a new name that fitted its language, its sound, its lineage, and its records. And the name he arrived with, the one his own people used, the one that meant something in the country that made him, went quiet for a very long time, not destroyed. This is the detail that gets me. It went quiet. He put it down and it waited. We know that because he picks it up again later, and when he does it the way you pick up an old tool that you know is still sharp. But that is the far end of the night. For now, look at what he gained, because it was not nothing, and I do not want to tell you a story where he was simply a victim from the first day, since that is not what the game shows us. He gained grace, the golden light of the Erd tree in his eyes, which in this world is not a metaphor for approval, it is closer to a permit. It is the visible sign that the order of the world recognizes you as belonging to it. Every Tarnished you meet in this game, including you, is defined by the loss of exactly that light, and the entire structure of the game is built around getting it back. He gained a wife who was a god, and children who would be demigods, and a lineage that would be called golden, and a war, several wars, a run of them long enough that the world today is still shaped like the outcome, and he gained a role that fitted him perfectly, which is the part that makes it a tragedy rather than a swindle. This was not a man who was tricked into a job he hated. This was a man who was extremely good at one specific thing, being handed the largest possible version of that thing at the highest possible stakes by the most important person in the world, and told that it mattered. Everybody wants that. Almost nobody gets it. He got it, and the item text tells us how he spent it, never once backwards, into every enemy across the entire world, for long enough that the histories stopped counting the individual wars and just recorded the era. And when we say it was a marriage, we should be careful about the word, because the Golden Order was not sentimental about marriage. Look at what happens later with Radigan, who was married to Renala until the queen required him elsewhere, at which point he crossed the country and married her instead. Marriage inside this order is a mechanism. It joins powers, it produces heirs, it settles wars. That is not cynicism on my part. That is the pattern the game lays out twice in the two most important marriages in its history. So the first Elden Lord took the name he was given and did the work he was brought in to do. Rest now. Next, we look at the thing that rode on his back and what it was really for. Chapter 5. The beast on his back. Welcome back. Let your breathing go slow and even, and let the room settle around you. If you have fought him, you already know about the beast. If you have not, this will be one of the strangest details in the whole story, and it is easy to miss what it implies. Godfrey does not walk into his final fight alone. There is a great beast clinging to his back, hunched over his shoulders, like an enormous gray dog that has decided to hold on and never let go. Its name is Sarosh, and it is described as a beast regent. Regent is a very specific word. A regent rules on behalf of somebody who cannot rule themselves. A regent is what you appoint when the person on the throne is a child, or ill, or absent, or in some way not to be trusted with the full weight of the position. And what Sarosh does on his back is restrain him. The lore is direct about this, in a way it usually is not. The beast suppresses his ferocity. It holds his fury down. The first Elden Lord, the man who won every war the Golden Order ever needed won, walked around the world with something fastened to his spine, whose entire purpose was to keep him from being fully himself. Now here is where the game leaves the door open, and I want to stand in the doorway with you for a minute, rather than dragging you through it. Nobody tells us who bound Sarosh to him. That is not an oversight in my reading. That is the interesting part. There are 3 ways to hold this, and the text supports all 3. The first is that it was a gift. Godfrey was too much even for himself. His ferocity was a genuine danger to the people around him, possibly to the order he served, and the beast was a mercy, given so that he could function in a throne room without breaking it. Under this reading, Sarosh is a walking stick. The second is that it was a condition of employment. The Golden Order needed his violence pointed outward at its enemies and switched off everywhere else. A war chieftain from beyond the map, standing in the holy capital with unrestrained fury and a golden axe, is a magnificent weapon and a permanent risk. Under this reading, Sarosh is a leash worn by the strongest man in the world, in front of everybody, for the entire length of his lordship. And the third is that he asked for it, that the man himself knew what he was, and knew what he had been brought here to do, and understood that a person who has never once taken a backward step needs something on his back to make stopping possible, because he cannot do it himself. Under this reading, Sarosh is a confession. I lean toward the second and third being the same reading, seen from 2 sides, but I am not going to pretend the game settles it. It does not. What the game does do, and I think this is one of the most elegant pieces of storytelling in it, is show you the answer physically at the very end. When Godfrey has finally had enough, in the last minutes of his last fight, he reaches over his shoulder, takes hold of the beast that has been riding him for an age of the world, and throws it away. He does not free it. He does not thank it. He discards it, the way you discard a thing that was put on you. Remember that phrase from the first chapter, the one about never taking a backward step. Add this to it, a man who cannot retreat, wearing a creature whose only job is to make him slower. We will come back to both. Sleep well. Next, the first great war, and the castle that is still standing because of how it ended. Chapter 6. The Storm. You are still here? Good. Let your shoulders drop, and let the pillow take everything. Every player of this game begins in roughly the same place, and almost nobody realizes they are standing inside the ruins of Godfrey's first argument. Stormvale Castle sits on the cliffs at the edge of the first real region you reach. It is enormous, ugly, brilliant, a fortress built into rock with the wind screaming through it. Today, it belongs to a small, resentful demigod who grafts other people's arms onto his body, and we will get to him because he is Godfrey's descendant, and he is the most humiliating thing that ever happened to that bloodline. But before Godric, before the Golden Order held it at all, That castle belonged to somebody else. The Stormhawks remember him. So do the storm sorceries, and the old ruined banners, and a handful of item descriptions that read like the losing side wrote them. The Storm Lord. We do not get his name, we get his weather. A power in the high cliffs, old with birds sworn to him, and a wind that fought on his behalf, holding one of the natural gates into the golden country. He was not a monster. There is no suggestion he was corrupt, or diseased, or in violation of some cosmic principle. He was simply there, holding his own ground in the way of a new order that had decided the whole map was going to be gold. Godfrey went up the cliffs and killed him. That is the entire war, as the histories keep it. A Stormlord existed, the first Elden Lord went to Stormvale, and afterwards there was no Stormlord. The castle passed into golden hands, the birds became a curiosity, and the sorceries of the storm became something a wandering player picks up in a corner 200 years later without ever learning who they were taken from. I want to point at something in that, because this is the pattern for everything else he did. We remember the winner's version. The Stormhawks are described in relation to the man who beat their king. The castle is described in relation to the lineage that took it. Every single thing about the storm survives inside the Golden Order's filing system, labeled by its defeat. And the man who did the defeating did not get to write any of it. He was not a scholar. He did not found an academy. He did not build a cathedral. He went where he was sent and made the alternative stop existing, and then he went to the next place, and the record of it went into the Order's hands, where it became a chapter about the Order. That is what the Long March actually was, once he arrived. Not one campaign, a working life. And here is the part I keep turning over. The world you play in is almost entirely the shape he left it in. The reason the Golden Law reaches the coast, and the mountains and the cliffs, and the plateau, is that a man from outside walked to each of those places and settled the question with an axe. Every peaceful golden field in this game is a field where his answer stuck. There is no monument to that anywhere in the lands between. There is a talisman with his face on it that makes your charged attacks stronger. Rest now. Next, all the wars that nobody bothered to write down. Chapter 7, The Wars with No Names. Wherever you drifted, this is a good place to come back to. Let your breathing slow. The histories give us two of his wars clearly. The storm on the cliffs and the giants in the mountains. Everything else is a shape under a blanket. That is not a gap in the writing. That is what an age of war actually looks like from the far end of it. When you fight for long enough, the individual campaigns stop being events and become a climate. Nobody says the year of the seventh crossing. They say the age of the wars, and then they move on to what came after, because what came after is the part that concerns them. So let us stand in the blanket for a few minutes and feel the size of what is underneath it. The dragons held this world before the Erd Tree did, genuinely held it, in the way weather holds a valley, ancient and enormous and completely uninterested in anybody's law. The Golden Order went to war with them. That war is everywhere in this game if you look. Dragon corpses in fields, dragon cults in ruins, a whole cathedral built around the practice of eating them. The lightning of the ancient dragons taught to men, which means at some point men had to be close enough to dragons to learn. Godwin ended that war with peace. That is his achievement, and I gave it to him properly in his own chapter. But peace is what you make when a war has been going long enough that both sides can see the bottom of it, and somebody spent that time doing the fighting. There were others. There are ruins in this game that belong to nothing you can name. Colossal statues in the middle of nowhere with no cult attached. Old fortifications facing directions that do not make sense anymore. Weapons and techniques from traditions that have no living practitioners. Every one of those is the residue of somebody who lost in a war that did not get a name, during the age when the golden law was being made true. Here is the thing about a working life measured that way. A scholar leaves behind a library, a sorcerer leaves behind a school, a saint leaves behind a cathedral and a set of practices and people who repeat their words for centuries. Everything those people do is additive. It piles up where you can see it. A war leader's entire body of work is subtractive. It is a list of things that are no longer there, and the moment the subtraction is complete, the space it leaves gets filled by everybody else, and they build their libraries and cathedrals on top of it, and the ground is not credited. The whole map is his monument. That is the only honest way to say it. The reason the Golden Law reaches every coast and cliff and plateau in this game is that a man from outside the map went to each place and settled the question personally, and there is not a single structure in the lands between raised to say so. There is one small thing that survives, and I find it more touching than a monument would be. His techniques are still being used. Somewhere in this game, you can learn to fight the way he fought. The stamp that shakes the ground, the charge that does not stop, the raw grappling. They persist as ashes of war and as skills passed down through fighting orders, held not by scholars or priests, but by soldiers, the way soldiers actually keep things, which is by continuing to do them. The Golden Order kept his image in a throne room. The people who fight for a living kept his moves. I know which of those I would call remembrance. Sleep well. Next, the mountains, and the enemy that was not defeated so much as sentenced. Chapter 8. The War in the Mountains. Welcome back. Let everything slow down around you, and let your hands go soft. At the top of the world, there is a range of frozen mountains, and everything up there is a leftover from a war the Golden Order won so completely that the losing side survives as weather damage. The giants lived in the mountaintops. They kept a flame, and the flame was not a tool or a resource. It was a god to them, or close enough to a god that the distinction did not matter to the people who died over it. The order came for them during the age we are describing, the age when the Golden Law was being made true by force, and the giants lost. I want to be careful here because the game is careful here. It does not always tell us whose hand was on which weapon in which war. What it tells us is that this was the era of the wars, that the first Elden Lord was the Order's war, and that when the fighting in the mountains was finished, the giants were not a people anymore. They were a punishment, because this war did not end the way Stormvale ended. At Stormvale, a lord was killed and a castle changed hands, and that was that. In the mountains, something else happened, and it is one of the coldest decisions in the history of this world. The last of the giants was not killed. He was cursed to sit beside the flame he worshipped and guard it, forever, unable to die and unable to leave. If you go up there now, you will find him, enormous and chained and still alive after all this time, dragging himself in a circle around the fire that was the center of his people's faith, kept breathing by a curse so that the fire could not go out and could not be used. That is not the behavior of an army. That is the behavior of a legal system. And this is the moment to name the thing that separates the man from the order he served, because the game is quite deliberate about the difference. Godfrey's method, everywhere we can see it clearly, is simple and total and finished. He goes to the place, he meets the thing, one of them stops existing, and then it is over. There's a brutal cleanliness in it. When the Storm Lord fell, the storm was done. The Golden Order's method is different. The Order does not finish things. The Order files them. It takes a defeated enemy and converts it into a permanent category, impure, accursed, blasphemous. Then it keeps that category alive, sometimes literally, so that the law has something to point at. The giants got the second treatment, and so did something else that came out of this age, something much closer to home, which we are going to get to in 3 chapters, and which is going to hurt. There is one more thing worth sitting with about the mountain war. The fell god the giants worshipped did not vanish when they lost. It went somewhere. Ages later, it turns up in the body of one of his own sons, burning inside the chest of a horned man who lived in a sewer and was hated for the way he was born. Nothing in this world is ever really finished. It is only put out of sight in the same order it was defeated in. Rest now. Next, the men who fought beside him and what happened to them afterwards. Chapter 9. The Knights with Horns. You are still here. Good. Let your breathing slow right down. There is a kind of knight in this game that is out of place everywhere you find one. Crucible knights. You meet them in old chapels, in the bottoms of ruins, guarding tombs that nobody visits. They are heavy, patient, honorable in a way that almost nothing else in this world bothers to be. They wear thick plate and carry towering shields, and they will meet you cleanly, and they will hurt you. And their armor has horns on it. Their techniques sprout tails and wings and things that grow out of the body in ways the Golden Order later decided were unacceptable. A crucible knight fights with the shapes of the older world, the churning, blended, everything at once world that came before the tree sorted life into approved categories. These were Godfrey's knights. That fact reframes him, and it reframes them, and it explains why they are always found in places that feel forgotten. The first Elden Lord came from outside the Golden Country, and the fighting order that formed around him was made of men who honored the crucible, the primordial life that the Erdtree's law would eventually declare impure. For a while that was fine. For a while the Horned Knights were the elite guard of the highest man in the world, and the golden lineage was proud of them, and there was no contradiction at all. Think about what had to happen next for that to become embarrassing. The law hardened, it always does. In the early days, an order is busy fighting for its life, and it will accept help from anybody who can swing something heavy. Later, once it has won, it starts looking around at its own household and deciding which parts of it are appropriate. The crucible went from being the ancient root of all life to being a contaminant. Horns went from being a sign of primordial strength to being evidence of a curse. And the crucible knights, who had not changed at all, found themselves standing in a country where the shapes on their armor were the shapes of the enemy. Most of them are dead where you find them. Some are guarding graves. One or two are still doing their jobs in ruins, so old that the job no longer makes sense. There is a quiet dignity in that which I find harder to look at than most of this game's horrors. Nobody executed them. Nobody hunted them down. The world simply moved the line of what was acceptable and left them on the far side of it, still standing at their posts. That is the second time in 3 chapters that we have watched the Golden Order do this. It does not destroy what it defeats. It reclassifies it and lets time do the rest. And now hold both of these facts next to each other, because together they make a shape. The first Elden Lord was an outsider whose personal guard honored the crucible. The Golden Order came to consider crucible traits a curse. His children were about to be born. Sleep well. Next, we meet the firstborn, who was everything the Order wanted. Chapter 10. The Golden Sun. Wherever you drifted off to, this is a good place to come back to. Get comfortable and let your breathing slow. Godwyn was the first child of Marika and Godfrey, and by every account left in the world, he was the real thing. There is a category of person in stories who is beloved because the story needs somebody to be beloved, and there is a category who is beloved because they earned it, and Godwyn seems to be the second one. He is called Godwyn the Golden, not the strong, not the terrible, not the wise, golden. The word the whole civilization used for its highest good was used as his name, and nobody appears to have argued. The detail that always gets me about him is the dragons. Godwin made peace with the ancient dragons. Not conquest, peace. He fought them, and then at some point, he stopped fighting them. And what came out of that was a genuine alliance. Dragon knights, dragon cults, human beings taught dragon lightning by dragons who agreed to teach it. One of the great old dragons, Fortisax, became his friend and stayed his friend past the point where friendship was any use to anybody. Think about what that says about the boy. He was the son of a man who solved problems by going forward into them and removing them, and he grew up to be the one member of that family who could end a war by talking. That is the small human thing I hold onto with Godwin. His father's answer to the storm was to climb the cliffs and kill its lord. His answer to the dragons, an older and larger and more dangerous power than the storm ever was to sit down with them. He was the heir, not only by being born first, he was the argument for the whole system. Look, the Golden Order could say, look what our order produces. A prince who is loved by his own people and by the things his people used to fight. If the law is good, this is what the law grows. And then, on a night we will get to properly later, somebody put a black knife into him and killed his soul while leaving his body alive. I am not going to tell that story here because it does not belong to this chapter, and because Godfrey was not in the country when it happened, which is a fact I want to save for the exact moment it lands hardest. What belongs here is simpler and sadder. Godwin was the one thing his father made that nobody in the world had a complaint about, and his father was not there for the end of it. Godfrey was already gone. Whatever grief there was in the Golden family that night, it was grief that took place in a house he had been walked out of. There is no item in this game, no line of dialogue, no memory, no monument that tells us Godfrey ever learned what happened to his son. That silence is the answer to a question the game refuses to ask out loud, and we are going to be standing inside it for a while tonight. Rest now. Next, we go down into the sewer and meet two more of his children. Chapter 11, The Suns Beneath the City. Welcome back. Settle in properly and let the bed take all of your weight. Beneath the golden capital, there is a sewer, and it is enormous, and it is where the city puts everything it does not want to look at. Two of Godfrey's sons grew up down there. The Golden Order had a category by this point for people born with horns, omen. The horns are crucible traits, the shapes of the older world coming back up through a body that did not ask for them, and the Order had decided that this was a curse and that curses require management. Common omens had their horns cut off, which they usually did not survive. The ones who lived were sent into the sewers to work, out of the light, where the city could benefit from them without seeing them. And then the queen herself, the god at the center of the law, gave birth to two of them, Morgo and Moog, twins, horned, born inside the family that had made the rule. There is a version of this world where that is the moment the rule breaks. A god looks at her own sons, understands that the category is arbitrary, and rewrites it. The Golden Order could have simply declared that the Crucible is holy after all. It had the authority. It had made the category up in the first place. Oh, that is not what happened. What happened is that they were spared the cutting because their blood was too valuable to damage, and then they were put in the sewer anyway. Not exiled, not killed, kept. Underneath their own house, alive, royal, unmentioned. I want to be honest that we do not know where their father was for this, or what he thought, or whether he was consulted. The game does not say. He may have been away at a war. He may have been standing in the room. There is no line anywhere that puts him at the decision. But he was the father of those children, and he was the man whose personal knights wore horns on their armor with pride, and the world he had spent his life making true was the world that put his sons in a drain. That is the cost of the job, laid out with no comment. He went to the mountains and the cliffs and made the golden law real everywhere, and the law he made real came home and applied itself to his own bloodline. What the two of them did with that is the tragedy of their own lives, and I have told it at length elsewhere, so tonight I will keep it short. One of them stayed. Morgo took a second name, took up the defense of the city that had hidden him, and spent his entire existence killing intruders on behalf of a capital that would never once acknowledge him. He believed in the law that had condemned him. He is the most loyal figure in the entire game, and it did him no good whatsoever. The other one left. Moog went down into the dark, found something older and hungrier waiting there, and built himself a dynasty out of blood in an underground palace where he could be a lord rather than a secret. Two sons of the first Elden Lord, one who accepted the verdict and defended the court that gave it, one who rejected the verdict and went to find another god. Neither of them ever met their father, as far as the world records. Neither of them appears in any account of his life. When the histories list the golden lineage, they list Godwyn, and then they list the descendants who came through him, and the two boys in the sewer are simply not part of the sentence. Sleep well. Next, the way he fought, and what it was costing him the whole time. Chapter 12. The man who could not step back. You are still here? Good. Let your jaw come loose, and let your breathing slow. I told you to remember the phrase, so here it is again. He never took a backward step. There is a talisman in this game with his face on it, and what it does is make your charged attacks stronger. That is the mechanical expression of the man. Not defense, not recovery, not any of the things that keep a fighter alive over a long career. The thing his memory improves is the commitment of going forward into something with everything you have. For most of his life, this was simply correct. It worked. Against the storm, against the mountains, against every power that stood between a new law and the whole map, the correct answer really was to go forward and not stop. He was not being reckless. He was being effective at a scale nobody else in the world could match, for longer than most civilizations last. But watch what a life like that does when you follow it all the way down. Everything he was praised for is a form of not stopping. Ferocity that had to have a beast strapped to it. A charge with no backward step in it. A war record with no pauses long enough to be recorded separately. In a world of gods and sorcerers and scholars and saints, the first Elden Lord is a man defined entirely by forward motion. And a person defined entirely by forward motion has one obvious vulnerability, and it is not in combat. It is what happens when the road runs out. Here's the pattern the game gives us, and it is the sadder for how ordinary it is. He was excellent at exactly one thing. That one thing was enormously needed for a long time. Everybody around him praised him for it, married him for it, made him lord for it, and nobody in all that time asked what he was supposed to be when the thing was no longer needed, because there was no reason to ask, because there was always another war. I have a suspicion about Siraj, and I will flag it as suspicion rather than fact, because the text does not confirm it. I think the beast was not only there to protect other people from him, I think it was there to give him a stopping mechanism he did not have, because a man who cannot take a backward step cannot end a fight, and a lord who cannot end a fight is not a lord. He is a weapon lying on a table, which is a fine thing to be, right up until the day somebody decides that the table needs clearing. Rest now. Next, his blood, and what became of it once he was not there to represent it. Chapter 13. What became of the golden blood. Welcome back. Let the room go quiet around you, and let your shoulders drop. Godfrey's line is called the Golden Lineage, and if you want to understand what the lands between actually did with his inheritance, you only have to look at the two descendants the game bothers to show you. The first is Godric. He holds Stormvale now, the same castle Godfrey took from the Storm Lord. He is the first major boss most players fight, and the game does not treat him with any dignity, because he has not earned any. He is a small, frightened, self important man in an enormous fortress, and his defining behavior is grafting. He cuts the limbs off other people, soldiers, servants, whoever is available, and sews them onto his own body. And when he has run out of good options, he grafts a dragon's head onto his arm. There is a line in the game where he prays, and it is the most honest thing anybody in this story ever says about lineage. He calls himself a lesser scion. He apologizes for the state of himself. He promises to be a worthy heir. That is what happened to the Golden Blood. 4 or 5 generations after a man crossed the world and won every war in it, his descendant is stitching other people's arms to his own shoulder and whispering apologies to an ancestor who is not there to hear them. The second is Godfrey, who most players never find. He is buried in a catacomb. He grafts as well, and his entire existence in this game is a coffin and a boss fight and a name that is one syllable away from his ancestors. 2 heirs, both grafting, both trying to build with borrowed body parts a version of the thing their forefather simply was. And that is the horrible little joke at the bottom of it. Godfrey never needed anybody else's arms. His entire identity was that he did the thing himself with his own hands without stopping. His descendants inherited the position, the castle, the name, the claim, and none of the substance, and so they took to sewing. There is one more inheritance to account for, and this one is not a joke. It is you. The Tarnished are his people, not metaphorically. The warriors who followed him, who lost their grace when he lost his, who were walked out of the lands between, along with their lord, and who lived and died and had children in the exile he was sent into. The line of descent runs from those warriors to the man or woman you are playing. When the game tells you that you are a Tarnished of no renown, it is telling you which side of a very old dismissal you were born on. So the golden lineage, in the end, produced 2 things: a grafting duke in a castle apologizing to a portrait, and a countryside full of exiles who eventually came back. Sleep well. Next, the enemies run out. On Chapter 14, when there was nothing left to fight. Wherever you have drifted, this is a good place to come back to. Let everything ease off. Here's the sentence the whole night has been walking toward, and it is short. He won. Not a war, all of them. The storm was finished, the mountains were finished. Every power that had stood in the way of the Golden Law was either dead, cursed, buried, reclassified, or too frightened to matter. The map was gold. The law was true, not because it was persuasive, but because there was nothing left standing to argue with it. The Golden Order had achieved exactly what it hired him to achieve. Now I want you to try to feel the shape of the moment rather than the fact of it, because the fact is a line in a history book, and the shape is a man standing in a throne room in the most beautiful capital in the world with a golden axe and absolutely nothing to do with it. Every skill he has is a war skill. Every quality he is praised for is a war quality. The ferocity, the forward charge, the refusal to retreat, the ability to walk into anything. In a country at war, that is the most valuable set of attributes in existence. In a country at peace, it is a management problem, and the Golden Order was now, permanently, a country at peace. That was the entire point of the exercise. Peace under one law, under one tree, forever, with everything else filed away. I said at the start of the night that grace is not love, grace is employment. This is the chapter where that stops being a clever line and becomes a description of events. because the light did not leave him during a defeat. It did not leave him during a scandal or a betrayal or a crisis of faith. It left him at the exact moment his usefulness ended, and the game states the causality in that order, plainly, in the description of the weapon he carried. When the last of his enemies had fallen, the grace of gold left his eyes, not because of anything he did, because he had finished. Rest now. Next, the day it actually happened, and what it looked like from inside his own face. Chapter 15, The Light Going Out. Welcome back. Get comfortable and let your breathing slow right down. I want to describe this properly because the game gives it to us in one clause, and it deserves more than a clause. Grace in the lands between is visible. It is not an internal state. It is not a private matter between a person and their God. It is light in the eyes, and other people can see it. That is the whole cruelty of the mechanism. Your standing with the order of the world is written on your face in a color where everybody can read it. So picture the room. He is the first Elden Lord. He is standing in a golden capital that exists in its current shape because of him. The wars are over. Somewhere in that city are his wife, who is a god, and his children, and the law he made true, and the light goes out of his eyes, not slowly as far as we can tell, not with a warning. There is no scene where somebody comes to him and explains that his position is being reviewed. The grace of gold left his eyes, and in that moment, in front of anybody who happened to be looking at him, he stopped being one of the golden and became one of the tarnished. That word, by the way, is worth holding for a second. Tarnished. Not fallen, not exiled, not banished, not condemned. Tarnished. It is a word about metal. It is what happens to something golden when it is left out and stops shining. It carries no crime in it at all. It is a description of surface, applied to people as a verdict. Now, the question everybody asks at this point, and the honest answer, is that the game will not give you one. Did she do it? Here are the readings, and they are all live. The first is that this was simply how grace works, and nobody decided anything. Grace flows from the Erd tree to those who serve its order, and when a man's service is complete, the flow stops, the way a river stops when the season ends. Under this reading, there is no villain. There is only a system working exactly as designed and a man who happened to be standing at the end of it. I find this the coldest of the three, and it may well be the true one. The second is that Marika withdrew it deliberately, because a warlord with nothing left to fight is the most dangerous object in a country at peace, and she understood that better than anybody. Under this reading, she looked at her own husband, calculated, and turned him off. And the third is the one that has been gathering support for years, and it requires you to look at the whole shape of her plan rather than this one night. Marika needed, eventually, somebody strong enough and free enough to do the one thing no one inside her order could ever do. She needed a Tarnished. Under this reading, the exile of Godfrey and his warriors is the first move in a very long game, and the discarded men were not thrown away. They were planted, and centuries later the crop came back to the capital with a sword. I lean toward the third on the evidence of what she does later, but I want to say clearly that the game does not confirm it, and that the difference between the second and the third is not really a difference of fact. It is a difference of intent, and intent is exactly the thing this world never gives us. And notice, in all three readings, what does not appear anywhere. Nobody asks him, rest now. Next, the word they used to do all of it. Chapter 16, the word they used. Wherever you drifted, this is a good place to come back to. Let your breathing slow and let your hands go soft. I want to spend a few minutes on a word, because the Golden Order's most effective weapon was never an army. Tarnished. Say it slowly. It is a word about metal. It describes what happens to something golden when it is left out in the air and stops shining. There is no accusation anywhere inside it. It does not mean traitor. It does not mean criminal. It does not mean heretic or oathbreaker or coward. It means dulled. And that is the word an entire civilization used to justify walking a people out of the country. This is the Order's real technique. And once you see it, you find it everywhere in this game. It does not usually argue with you. It renames you, and then it treats the new name as a finding of fact. The horned children were not called children with horns. They were called omen, which is a word meaning a sign of something bad coming, and once you are a sign rather than a person, putting you in a sewer is not cruelty, it is housekeeping. The people who came back from death were not called the returned or the surviving. They were called those who live in death, which sounds like a violation of natural law rather than a description of somebody's grandmother. And once it is a violation, hunting them is not murder, it is maintenance. And the ancient shapes of life, the horns and tails and wings of the crucible, were not called old, they were called impure. And once a shape is impure, a knight who wears it on his armor is not a hero of the founding wars anymore. He is a problem in a chapel. Every single one of those words does the same job. It converts a person into a category, and it converts a decision into an observation. Nobody in the Golden Capital ever had to stand up and say, "We are throwing our first lord and all of his warriors out of the country because they are no longer useful." They only had to say that the light had left them, which was visibly true, and let the word do the rest. That is why the exile happened without an argument. There was nothing to argue with. You cannot appeal against a description of your own eyes. And this is what makes the last minutes of his life mean what they mean. When he threw the beast off his back and said his own name out loud, he was doing the only thing anybody in this world ever manages against that machinery. He was refusing the vocabulary, not their name for him, not their creature on his shoulders, not their word for what he had become when the light went out, just the older, plainer, truer thing, a man from a hard country who fought. Sleep well. Next, the walk out. Chapter 17, The Long Walk Back. You are still here? Good. Let your shoulders come down and let everything ease. He came into this country on a march that was long enough to be named after. He left the same way. The Tarnished were driven from the lands between. That is the phrasing the world uses, and it is the founding fact of the game you are playing. Not one man, a people. The Lord and his warriors and their families, everybody in whom the light had failed, walked out of the golden country and into whatever is beyond it, and the gate closed, and that was the end of the first age. I keep trying to imagine the practicalities of it, and every version I come up with is worse than the last. Did they leave together in a column with banners? Did it happen over months as more and more people were noticed to have dull eyes? Was there a day, an announcement, a decree read out in the capital? Or did it simply become impossible to stay in the way that things become impossible, until walking out was the only thing left that felt like a decision? The game does not say. What the game says is that they went, and that the country they went to was not a country, it was simply a way. And here's the detail that turns the whole thing over for me, and it is the second time we are using the phrase, exactly as I promised in the first chapter. He never took a backward step. Read it again now. The most famous fact about this man, the line preserved on a talisman, the quality that made him the greatest war leader in the history of the world, is that he did not turn around. And the last thing he did in the lands between was walk out of it in one direction, away from his wife and his throne and his sons and the entire structure of his life without turning around. The glory and the wound are the same sentence, they always were. It just took an exile for the second meaning to become visible. I do not think he begged. Nothing in the man suggests begging. I think he heard the terms and understood that there was no enemy in front of him to fix this, because the thing that had happened to him was not an enemy. It was a decision, or a season, or a plan. And a golden axe is no use at all against a decision. So he did the only thing his entire life had trained him to do. He went forward. It just happened to be out. Rest now. Next, the people who went with him, and why you are one of them. Chapter 18, The First of the Tarnished. Wherever you drifted, this is a good place to come back to. Let your breathing slow, and let the bed hold you. The Tarnished are not a curse. They are a workforce that was let go. I have told a lot of these stories now, here at the Lorden, and this is the fact I find hardest to shake, because the game hides it in plain sight and then builds its entire structure on top of it. Every Tarnished in this world, including the one you are playing, is descended from people whose only offense was being on the payroll of a war that ended. They were the Badlands warriors. They followed a chieftain across the world. They fought the storm, the mountains, the powers with no names. They won comprehensively on behalf of an order that was not originally theirs, and the moment the winning was complete, the light went out of all of them at once, and they were walked to the edge of the map. Generations passed out there. That is the part nobody dwells on. It was not an event, it was a condition. Children were born tarnished, who had never seen the Golden Country, who knew the Erd Tree only as a story their grandparents told, who inherited a dishonor they had no part in earning, from a war they had never fought, on behalf of a light that had never touched them. And then ages later, the light came back on and called them home. That is where you come in, and I think this is the most quietly brutal piece of design in the whole game. Your character does not begin as a hero. Your character begins as a returning employee. Grace touched your eyes again after 200 years of silence, and the moment it did, you got on a boat. You were not asked either. There is a phrase used for the returning tarnished, and it is fitting in a way I doubt anybody intended. You are called back to become Elden Lord, which is to say you are called back to fill the position that was vacated when the first man to hold it stopped being useful. You are applying for his job. The whole game is a story about a man being replaced, told from the point of view of the replacement. Sleep well. Next, the ones who answered that same call before you did. Chapter 19, The Ones Who Came Back Before You. You are still here. Good. Settle back in and let everything slow down. When the light came back on and called the tarnished home, you were not the only one who answered. You were not even close to the first. This is one of those facts the game states with scenery, rather than sentences, and once you notice it, you cannot walk through this world the same way again. There are dead, tarnished everywhere, in the fields of the first region, slumped against walls, in the tunnels, in the swamps, in the freezing mountains, in rooms so far off the path that nobody was ever coming to find the body. Every one of those corpses was somebody who heard the same call you heard, crossed the same sea, arrived with the same claim, and got as far as the place where you are now standing. Some of them went hollow, or mad, or simply stopped. Some of them are still walking around and will attack you on sight, which is the hardest version to look at, because it means they got here, and then something in them ran out, and the light in their eyes did not save them from any of it. There is a woman near the start of the game whose entire questline is this fact. She came over with a group of Tarnished, her own people, and they went to the castle together, and every single one of them died, and she survived. What she carries afterwards is their ashes. You can summon her dead companions to fight beside you. That is what became of a whole party of hopeful returning exiles. They are a consumable resource in somebody else's journey. There is a knight who got further than most, close enough to the end to see what was actually being asked of him, and who chose to set himself on fire with the madness of the three fingers rather than continue toward the throne. He is not lazy or weak. He is the opposite. He is somebody who arrived at the top of the hill, understood the job description, and refused it in the most permanent way available. So think about what the call actually was. An entire people descended from warriors who were dismissed when their war ended, living outside the map for generations with a light that had gone out of their eyes. Then one day, the light comes back. Not because anybody apologized, because the world requires the position of Elden Lord to be filled again, and the only candidates who can fill it are the ones who were thrown away. They were not called home, they were called back to work. And most of them died on the way, and the ones who survived long enough to reach the capital had to climb over the bodies of the ones who did not, which is exactly what you have been doing for 100 hours without thinking about it. There is one detail in all of this that I think is the game's quietest cruelty, and I want to put it down gently because it is the kind of thing that sits in your chest. Nowhere in the lands between does anybody thank them. Not the Round Table, not the Finger Maidens, not the Order that issued the call. The Tarnished are used as tools by every faction that meets them, and the language stays the same throughout. Worthy, unworthy. Fit to be Lord or not fit. Nobody in this world ever looks at the returning exiles and says, "We are sorry about what was done to your ancestors, and thank you for coming back anyway." Their first Lord did not get that either. Rest now. Next, the man who took the throne, he left empty. Chapter 20. The Second Lord. Welcome back. Let everything slow down and let your hands go soft. The throne did not stay empty. While Godfrey was walking out of the lands between, another man was walking in, and the Order had him ready. His name was Radigan. The short version, for anybody who has not spent a night on him, is this. Radigan was the Golden Order's champion, a red-haired giant of a man, devout in a way that Godfrey never was. He was sent to war against the Moon Queen Renala of Caria in the Lake Country. That war did not end in conquest. It ended in an armistice, sealed with a marriage, and Radigan stayed in the Lake Country as Renala's husband and had 3 children with her, and by every account we can find, he loved her. And then Queen Marika summoned him. He left. He crossed the country, and he married the god, and he became the second Elden Lord, and Renala was left in her academy with an egg and a grief that has not moved in centuries. You can go and see her now. She is still there, still holding it. So the same Order, within the space of one transition, discarded one consort and extracted another out of a marriage he had built a life inside. That is 2 men, both of whom served the Golden Order completely, both of whom were reassigned at the convenience of the god at its center. And there is a third layer under that one, which makes it stranger still, and which I will only touch tonight because it belongs to a different video. Marika and Radigan are one being, 2 names, 1 body, and no explanation offered. Whatever the summoning of Radigan was, it was not a straightforward second marriage. It may not have been a marriage at all in any sense we would understand, which leaves a question about the first marriage hanging in the air behind it. If the Queen's second consort was, in some fashion, herself, then what exactly was the first one? I am not going to answer that. I am not sure it can be answered from inside the text. But I want to note the shape, because the shape is the argument. Godfrey was brought in from outside to do a job. Radigan, who replaced him, may have been the god performing the job on herself. He was the last outsider. Everything after him was internal. Sleep well. Next, what it costs to be the first of anything. Chapter 21. The weight of going first. You are still here. Good. Let your breathing slow and let your shoulders drop. There is a word attached to him permanently, in every description, on every item, in every account, and I do not think most players notice how strange it is. First, the first Elden Lord, not the greatest, not the last, not the true, an ordinal. His identity in the historical record is a position in a sequence, and the sequence was invented for him and then continued without him. Think about what it means to be first at something in a world like this. Nobody had held the position before, which means nobody knew what the position was. There was no precedent explaining what an Elden Lord could expect, what protections came with it, how long it lasted, or under what conditions it could be ended. He was not accepting a job with known terms. He was becoming the experiment that established what the terms were. And every single thing we know about the terms, we know because they were applied to him. Nobody in the lands between knew that grace could be withdrawn from a lord until it was withdrawn from a lord. That was not a rule anybody had written down. It became a rule the day it happened to him, and everybody after him has lived inside a world where that possibility exists because he demonstrated it by having it done to him. That is what going first actually costs, not the danger. He was never frightened of danger. The cost is that you find out the shape of the arrangement by being the thing it is shaped around. And look at how the position hardened after him. Radigan came second, and by then everybody understood the pattern, including probably Radigan. The Golden Order had a template. A lord is a consort. A lord does the enforcement. A lord holds the title at the queen's discretion and does not inherit anything. Every part of that was learned by watching what happened to the man from the Badlands. Then centuries later, the call goes out again, across the sea, to a people who were made by the same event, inviting them to compete for the same chair under the same terms. You are the applicant. He is the case study. There is one more thing about going first that I keep turning over, and it is the sad practical one. He had nobody to ask. Everybody else in this story has a predecessor. Radigan can look at what happened to Godfrey. Morgotts can look at every omen who came before him. You, playing the game, have an entire ruined country of dead Tarnished to learn from, and a round table full of people who will tell you what the job involves. However bad it gets, there is always somebody who has been here before and left something behind. The first Elden Lord walked into a golden capital with an axe and a wife who was a god, and there was not one person alive who could tell him how this usually ends. He found out the way all first attempts find out, personally, and too late for it to be useful to him. Rest now. Next, the world he left, and how quickly it hardened. Chapter 22. The Order Without Him. You are still here? Good. Settle in, and let your breathing go slow and even. Here is a thing worth noticing about the lands between after Godfrey. It got worse. The Golden Orders under its second lord became narrower, stricter, and much more interested in purity than it had been under its first. This is the era of the fundamentalists, of the great cathedrals, of the doctrine that the tree's law is a perfect and closed system that can be reasoned about like mathematics. It is the era in which the categories stopped being wartime necessities and became theology. The omen curse hardened in this period. Those who live in death were hunted. The crucible went from being old to being obscene. The order stopped being a thing that had won a war and started being a thing that policed a peace. And the man whose knights wore horns was gone. I am not going to claim Godfrey would have prevented any of it. There is no evidence he was a liberal or a reformer or in any way inclined to argue with his wife's law. He was the war. The war was over. It is entirely possible that had he stayed, he would have simply stood in the throne room while the same decisions were made in front of him. But it is worth noticing what leaves the room when he leaves it. The Golden Order's founding lord was a man from outside its categories, whose personal guard honored the shape of life the Order would later condemn, who had no lineage inside the country, and whose entire authority was based on having done the work himself. Once he is gone, every remaining seat of power in the lands between is held by somebody born inside the system. Demigods, sorcerers, clergy, all of them the products of the order they enforce. There is nobody left in the building who remembers when the law was an argument rather than a fact. That is how orders calcify, not through cruelty exactly, through the removal of everybody who can remember it being otherwise. And the two horned boys were still down there in the sewer, under all of it, listening to a law get harder above their heads. Sleep well. Next, the night everything broke, and the man who was not there for it. Chapter 23. The night he was not there. Welcome back. Let your jaw unclench, and let the bed take all of your weight. Now we come to the night, and I have been holding it back for 18 chapters for exactly this reason. Rani, daughter of Radigan and Renala, an Empyrean chosen for godhood and unwilling to accept the terms, arranged a murder. Assassins with black knives, carrying stolen fragments of the Rune of Death, went into the capital and killed Godwyn the Golden. They did not kill him the way people are killed. They killed his soul and left his body alive. That is a distinction the lands betweens had not needed before, because death had been removed from the world, filed away by the Order like everything else it did not want. What came back that night was not ordinary dying. It was something the world had no procedure for. Godwyn's soul died. His flesh went on, down in the roots, and it grew, and it became the thing you can go and look at today if you are willing to walk all the way down into the deep, an enormous ruined face fused into the base of the tree, still and quiet and not remotely dead. Everything after that night is consequence. Marika shattered the Elden Ring. The demigods went to war over the pieces. The shattering broke the Golden Country into the ruin you spend the whole game walking through, and Godfrey was in the Badlands. I want to sit here for a moment, because this is the center of tonight, and nothing else in his story lands as hard. His firstborn son, the one the whole Golden family agreed on, the prince who made peace with dragons, was murdered in a way that had no name yet. In the capital, his father built the world around, and his father was thousands of miles away, in a country nobody records, in the second half of a life he had not chosen, with dull eyes. He could not have helped. That is the thing. Even if he had known, even if word had somehow crossed the map to him, there was no charge available. The thing that killed Godwyn was not an enemy standing on a hill, and there is no line in this game that tells us he ever found out. Not one. No item, no memory, no fragment of dialogue, no lament. When he finally returns, all those years later, he does not mention his son. He does not go to the deep. He does not stand over the roots. There are two readings, and this time I do not think either is comfortable. Either he never learned, and a man came home to a broken country carrying an ordinary grievance about a job without knowing that his child had been murdered in it. Or he learned, and by then it was so old, and he was so far past the point where anything could be done about it, that it had settled into him as one more thing the Golden Country had taken and not explained. Rest now. Next, the world he could see burning from a very long way away. On Chapter 24, Watching from Outside. Wherever you have drifted, this is a good place to come back to. Let your breathing slow. The shattering lasted a long time, and it destroyed almost everything. The demigods took their pieces of the Elden Ring and made war on each other with the whole world as the ground. Radon and Melania met in Caelid and left it poisoned forever. The capital was sealed. The Erd Tree stopped accepting anybody. The armies that had been built to enforce the golden peace turned inward and ate the country they were built to hold. Every single thing Godfrey spent his lordship building came apart in the hands of the people it had been built for, and he was outside, in a country with no name, watching a horizon that had a tree on it. I have to be honest that this is the part of the story where the game gives us the least. There is no chapter of Godfrey in exile. There is no item that describes his years out there. We know he was in the Badlands. We know he was called Hoarah again. We know that when he finally appears, he is a chieftain rather than a lord, and that he is spoken about by his own men as a warrior rather than a monarch. So we are reading a silence. But it is a shaped silence, and here is the shape. He had a name to go back to, and he went back to it. Whatever he did with those centuries, he did as the man who existed before the lands between named him. The golden version was over, and he did not spend the exile pretending otherwise, and he did not take a title that made him sound important. And when the light came back on for the Tarnished, and the long dead call went out for somebody to come and become Elden Lord, one of the people who heard it was the man who had held the position first. He came back, but not the way the others came back. The Tarnished you play crosses the sea in a coffin, small, unregarded, one of thousands, hoping to be worthy. Godfrey came back like a man returning to a house that owes him something. Sleep well. Next, the Badlands years, and the two names he had to choose between. Chapter 25, The Chieftain Again. Welcome back. Let your breathing slow, and let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Somewhere out beyond the map, a man who had been the first Elden Lord of the Golden Order started answering to Hoarah again. I find that transition more moving than almost anything else in his story, and I want to explain why, because on the surface it looks like a demotion, and I do not think it is one. He could have kept the golden name. Nobody out there was policing it. He had been the consort of a god. He had a golden axe, and the men around him had followed him across the world twice. If he had wanted to spend the exile as a deposed king, insisting on his title, telling the story of the wars to anybody who would sit still, he could have done that easily. Exiles do it constantly. It is the most human thing in the world to hold on to the version of yourself that hates status. He did not. He went back to the name his own people gave him, the one that meant something in the country that made him, and he was a chieftain in it. There is a kind of hardness in that which I think gets mistaken for simplicity. This is a man who understood, precisely and without self-pity, what he had actually been. He had been Godfrey while Godfrey was a thing the world required. The world stopped requiring it. Continuing to be Godfrey in a country with no Erd tree in it would have been a costume. So he put the costume down and took up the older, truer thing and waited, and I do not think he waited passively. Look at what he is when he comes back. Not a ruin, not a bitter old man kept alive by resentment. He returns as one of the most physically overwhelming figures in the entire game, in his own body, with his own name, with the ferocity intact. Whatever those centuries were, they were not decay. And that tells you something about the Badlands, which the game otherwise refuses to describe. Whatever that country is, it did not break him. It kept him. He went out there tarnished, with the light gone from his eyes, and he lived long enough for the world to fall apart, and he came back recognizably himself. I keep thinking about the difference between him and Rennala. Rennala was also discarded. Her consort was taken away by the same god who took his light. She stayed exactly where she was, in the room where it happened, with an egg in her arms, repeating a lullaby to children who were not there. She is still doing it when you meet her. She did not leave the room. Godfrey left the room, and the country, and the name, and kept walking, because he never took a backward step. Two people, the same wound, opposite responses. One of them stopped in the moment of the injury and stayed inside it forever. The other went so far forward that he ended up all the way outside the world, and then spent the rest of his existence waiting for a reason to come back. I am not certain which of those is worse. I am fairly certain neither of them is recovery. Rest now. Next, the road home, and what he found on it. Chapter 26. The Road Back. Wherever you drifted off to, this is a good place to come back to. Settle in. He came back into a country that had been eating itself for a long time. I want to walk his route with you because the game lets us, and because it is one of the few places where you can feel the size of what happened to his life without anybody explaining it. The lands between he was thrown out of was the finished product. The wars were won, the map was gold, the law was true, the capital shone. It was the most complete thing that had ever existed in this world, and every part of that completeness was resting on work he had personally done. The lands between. He came back to is a corpse being fought over, Limgrave, where his own descendant sits in the castle he took from the Stormlord, sewing arms onto himself. Caelid, red and rotting, where two demigods poisoned an entire region, and neither of them even won. Liurnia drowned with the Academy sealed, and the Moon Queen still holding her egg. The capital, which he built the world around, cut off behind a wall of golden thorns, with a horned man standing on the roof, killing everything that gets close, that horned man being his son, although nobody in the country would ever put it that way. He walked through all of that, and here is what I cannot stop thinking about. He would have recognized almost none of it, and he would have recognized all of the causes. Every ruin he passed was made of the same material as his own dismissal. The order he enforced ate its own children. The purity laws he made possible put his sons underground. The peace he won so completely that it made him obsolete lasted only until the family that inherited it decided to carve it up. If a man wanted a case for the prosecution, the whole country was won, and he had to walk the length of it to reach the tree. There is no scene of this, no cutscene, no dialogue, no item that records what he thought about any of it. That is the game's discipline, and it is why this world stays in people's heads. It gives you the beginning of a life, and the end of a life, and a country full of evidence in the middle, and it trusts you to do the arithmetic yourself in the dark. Sleep well? Next, the city he built, arranged like a diagram of everything we have said tonight. Chapter 27. The City He Built. Welcome back. Let your jaw unclench and let the bed take your weight properly. Lindell, the royal capital, is the most beautiful thing in this game, and it is arranged like a diagram of everything we have talked about tonight. Look at it as a vertical object rather than a place. At the very top, there is the Erd tree itself and the sanctuary at its foot, where the throne of the Elden Lord sits. That is where the golden shade of Godfrey stands guard, magnificent, restrained, still wearing the beast on its back, doing its one permitted job of stopping people from reaching the throne. Below that is the city proper. Gold roofs, wide avenues, cathedrals, gardens, the whole machine of the Golden Order expressed in architecture, statues everywhere. This is the place his wars paid for. Every stone of it is standing because the enemies who would have objected to it are not. And below that, underneath the streets and the gold and the prayers, is the sewer, which is where his sons lived. That is the diagram. His image at the top of the city, defending the throne. His children at the bottom of the city, in the drain, hidden because of the shape they were born in. And between the two, an entire civilization going about its business, worshipping a tree in a capital that would not exist without the man at the top and would not tolerate the boys at the bottom. I do not think that vertical arrangement is an accident. This game builds meaning out of geography more carefully than almost anything else in its medium. Down is where the truth is kept in this world. Down is where the eternal cities are, and the death roots, and the body of Godwin, and the blood palace, and every single thing the Golden Order decided the surface should not have to look at. Godfrey is the only member of his family who ended up in the sky, and he is not even there. It is a shade, a golden memory of a man standing in a sanctuary, still holding the door for an order that walked him out of the country. There is one more thing about the capital worth saying, because it is the last irony in the geography. When you finally fight the real man, you are not in the capital. He is not on the throne, he is not in the sanctuary, he is not inside the walls at all. He is outside, past the city, at the foot of the tree, in the open on the ground. The golden version of him stayed indoors, guarding the throne room. The actual man waited outside, on the dirt, where he could get his feet under him properly. Rest now. Next, the shadow he left standing in the throne room. Chapter 28. The Shade in the Sanctuary. You are still here. Good. Let everything go quiet around you. Before you meet the man, you meet the memory of him, and almost everybody who plays this game walks past the significance of it. High in the royal capital, in the sanctuary at the foot of the great tree, there is a golden figure waiting. It looks exactly like him. Same axe, same beard, same terrible forward charge, same beast on its back. It fights you the way he fights you, and when it is beaten, it does not die. It disperses, because it was never a body. It is a shade, an echo, a golden imprint left in a room. The capital of the Golden Order kept an image of its first lord, standing guard, in the most sacred space it had. Now hold that next to the fact that the same order stripped the light out of his eyes and walked him out of the country. That is the whole relationship in one architectural decision. The living man was a problem. The image of the man was an asset. Once he was safely gone, once he could no longer stand in a room and be an enormous outsider with an opinion, the order was perfectly happy to keep him. It kept him as decoration. It kept him as security. It kept the shape of his violence in the throne room, doing exactly the job it always wanted from him, which was to be the thing that stops other people from getting up the stairs. There is a word for what a country does when it exiles a man and then puts up a statue of him. It is not honor. It is inventory. And there is a detail in the shade that I think is deliberate, and if it is one of the sharpest jokes in the game. The shade has Siraj on its back, and it never throws him off. The golden version, the one the capital kept, the one that stands in the sanctuary being magnificent and appropriate, is the restrained one, the one with the leash still fastened. The real man, when he finally arrives, does something the shade cannot do: sleep well. Next, the beast, one more time before the end. Chapter 29. What the beast was holding. Welcome back. Let your breathing go slow and even. We need to settle Siraj before the fighting starts, because everything the last chapters mean runs through him. Here is what we know for certain. Siraj is a beast regent. He rides on Godfrey's back. His function is to suppress the first Elden Lord's ferocity. And when the moment comes, Godfrey removes him violently and does not put him back. Here's what the game leaves open, and I think the openness is the point. If Siraj was placed on him by the order, then Godfrey spent his entire lordship in a restraint that everybody could see, a restraint that was part of his official image. The golden shade in the sanctuary wears it. Every depiction of him as Elden Lord includes the thing on his back. The order did not hide the leash. It considered the leash part of the uniform. If Siraj was a gift, then somebody who loved him, or feared for him, or feared what he might do in a quiet room, gave him a way to be safe to stand near, and he accepted it and wore it for an age. And if Sarosh was his own idea, then the most ferocious man in the world looked at himself, honestly understood that his ferocity had no off switch, and voluntarily carried something that would slow him down for as long as slowness was required of him. Notice what all three readings share. In every one of them, the thing on his back exists because the world needed Godfrey to be less than Hoarah Loux was. The lordship required a smaller man, not weaker exactly, governable. The Badlands chieftain, who fought without limit, was excellent for the wars and impossible in a throne room, and so a version of him was assembled that could be walked through a palace without frightening the clergy, and that version had a beast fastened to its spine and a name in the local language, and a wife who was a god. He wore all of it for centuries. He wore it while they took his light. He was still wearing it when he came back. And then, in the last minutes of his last fight, in front of the only person who had come far enough to see it, he reached over his own shoulder, took hold of the beast, and threw it into the ground. Rest now. Next, the fight begins, and the first half of it is the Golden Man. Chapter 30. The first half of the fight. You are still here. Good. Let your hands go soft, and let everything ease off. You have burned the thorns and climbed to the foot of the Erd tree, and there is a man standing there in golden armor, enormous, bearded, with an axe. He tells you exactly what he thinks you are before he starts, and it is worth paying attention to the framing rather than the words. He does not call you a usurper. He does not call you a criminal or a heretic or an abomination, which is what every other guardian of this order has called you at some point in the journey. He looks at a Tarnished who has come all the way back to claim the Elden Ring, and he identifies the thing driving you as ambition, and he says it is his job to put that fire out. That is not theology. That is a professional assessment. He is, in that moment, doing the job he originally had. Somebody is coming for the throne of the Golden Order. The first Elden Lord is standing in front of it. There is nothing personal in it at all. And this first half of the fight is Godfrey, golden, armored, controlled, ceremonial. He fights like the Order's own champion, with the beast still riding him, with technique that could be described in a knightly manual. He stamps, and the ground answers. He charges and does not stop. It is enormous, and it is beautiful, and every part of it is the version of him that the capital was comfortable putting a statue of. Watch how much of it is about ground. His attacks shake the earth. He drives things into the floor. He is fighting like a man who has spent an age, holding territory, and knows that every argument in this world is finally about who is standing on the ground when it ends. For a while, it is a duel between two candidates for the same position. And then you hurt him enough, and something changes, and it is the moment this entire story turns on. Sleep well. Next, the beast comes off. Chapter 31. Hoarah Loux, Warrior. Welcome back. Let your breathing slow right down, and let the bed take everything. He stops. That is the first thing, and it is almost easy to miss. The man who never took a backward step in the middle of a fight stops fighting. Then he reaches over his shoulder, grabs the beast regent that has ridden him since before your entire civilization was arranged, hauls it off his back, and throws it away. And it does not resist him. Sarosh comes off like an object, and then he takes off the golden name. He announces himself again, and the name he gives is the one from the Badlands, and the word he attaches to it is not Lord, and not King, and not Consort. Warrior. Everything changes. He drops the ceremony. He drops the axe forms, the knightly geometry, the shape of a champion defending a throne. What is left is a very old man from a hard country, unbelievably strong, grappling. He grabs you. He lifts you off the ground and drives you into it. He hits like something that has never once been told to stop, because the thing that told him to stop is lying discarded 20 feet away. I want to name exactly what happened there, because I think it is why this fight stays with people who could not tell you a single thing about Godfrey's lore. He did not transform, nothing supernatural occurred. He simply stopped performing the role. For an entire age of the world, he had been the golden version, restrained, titled, named in somebody else's language, employed. He kept doing it after they took his light. He kept doing it when he walked out of the country. He put the golden armor back on to come home and stand at the foot of the tree and do the job one more time. And then, at the very end, with nobody watching except the person who had come to replace him, he decided he did not have to anymore. The last thing the first Elden Lord ever did was quit, not the fight. He does not quit the fight, he escalates it. He quits the arrangement. He quits the name they gave him, the beast they fastened to him, the technique that made him presentable, and the entire 200-year-old understanding that his ferocity belonged to somebody else and had to be kept within limits so that suited them. He gave it all back in the last 10 minutes of his life, and then he fought you as himself. Rest now. Next, the name on the grave. Chapter 32, the name he chose to die under. Wherever you have drifted, this is a good place to come back to. Let your shoulders come down. When it is over, when he finally goes down at the foot of the tree, look at what he leaves behind. The remembrance you take from his body is not the remembrance of Godfrey. It is the remembrance of Loux. The game could have called it anything. It calls his death by his own name. That is the quietest and most complete statement anybody makes about him in the entire story, and the game makes it in a menu, in small text, where most players will read it in half a second while checking whether they can afford a new weapon. He arrived as a chieftain and was renamed. He served for an age under the new name. He was discarded under it, walked out of the country under it, and remembered by history under it. His descendants carry variations of it: Godric, Godfrey. The whole golden lineage is a set of echoes of the syllable they gave him, and when he died as the other thing, the original, the one that came from a country the lands between never bothered to write down. I said in the first chapter that the Badlands survive as a few words of item text. Here is the last of them, and it is his death notice. There is one more thing about the ending that I have never quite been able to put down. He does not win. He was never going to win. The person he is fighting is the next Elden Lord, and this world runs on replacement, and his function in the story is to be the last obstacle before the throne room. Structurally, he is a gate, but look at what he actually accomplishes in his final hour, measured against what was taken from him. They took his light, they took his position, they took his name, they took his country, his sons, his war, and the entire meaning of his existence, and they did it without ever once explaining themselves or asking what he thought. And at the end, he stood at the foot of the tree that did it, threw off the last piece of their equipment, said his own name out loud, and made the next Elden Lord earn the job over his body. That is not a victory. I would not insult him by calling it one. It is the closest thing to an answer that a man in his position was ever going to get. Sleep well. Next, what he actually came back for, because it was not the throne. Chapter 33, what he came back for. Welcome back. Get comfortable and let your breathing go slow and even. There is an assumption most players make about that last fight, and I made it too for a long time. The assumption is that he came back for the throne. I do not think he did. Look at the evidence and start with the timing, because the timing is strange and nobody talks about it. Grace returned to the Tarnished, and thousands of them crossed the sea to try their luck at becoming Elden Lord. That call went out to everybody. He heard it at the same time your character heard it, and he did not go straight to the capital and take it. He is not sitting on the throne when you arrive. He has not raised the Badlands and marched on Lanedell, which is a thing he could plainly have done, since he is the single most capable military leader in the history of this world, and the country is in pieces. His son Morgo is holding the capital with a fraction of that ability, and holding it well. If Godfrey had wanted the Golden Throne back by force, there is no evidence anybody could have stopped him. Instead, he waits, at the foot of the tree, past the capital, past the thorns, in the last place before the end, until somebody comes all the way through. That is not the position of a man who wants the job. That is the position of a man who wants to see who is going to get it. And there is a second piece of evidence, which is what he says. He identifies you as somebody driven by ambition and appoints himself the one to put that fire out. He is not defending his property. He is testing a candidate. That is a completely different posture, and it is one you only take up if the outcome you care about is not who wins today, but what happens afterwards. So here is what I think he came back for, and I will mark it clearly as my reading rather than the game's statement. I think he came back for the one thing the Golden Order never gave him: a conclusion. Consider how his lordship ended, not with a defeat, not with a duel, not with anything that a warrior could look at and understand. It ended with a light going out and a walk to the edge of the map. There was nothing to fight, nothing to answer, nothing to lose against. He was not beaten by anybody. He was concluded administratively by a system, and then he had centuries to sit with the fact that the most important thing that ever happened to him happened without a single blow being struck. For most people, that is a grievance. For a man whose entire existence is organized around going forward into things, it is closer to a wound that cannot heal because there is no direction to go in. And then, ages later, the world offered him something the exile never could: an actual opponent, walking up the hill toward the throne he used to hold, with the same claim he once had, coming from the same exile he was sent into, carrying grace in their eyes that used to be in his. Somebody he could finally settle it with. He did not come back to be Elden Lord again. He came back to have the ending he was never given, against the only person in the world whose story is the same shape as his. Rest now. Next, the other man who was used the same way. Chapter 34, The Other Consort. You are still here. Good. Let your jaw unclench, and let the room settle. To see the shape of what was done to Godfrey, put him beside the man who replaced him, because the Golden Order ran the same operation twice, and the second run tells you it was not an accident. Radagon of the Golden Order. Champion, red-haired, devout. Sent to war in the Lake Country, fought Rennala to a standstill, and the war ended in a marriage. He stayed. He had 3 children: Radon, who worshipped him, Ricard, Ronnie. He lived in the Academy Country as the Moon Queen's husband, and by everything the world remembers, he was not pretending. Then the summons came from the capital, and he went, and he married the god, and he became the second Elden Lord. Now hold the 2 of them next to each other. Both were brought into the Golden Order from outside its center, one from beyond the map, one from the Lake Country's war. Both were used for exactly what they were good at. Both were joined to the Queen at the moment their usefulness peaked. Both had children who became the load-bearing structure of the world, and both were, in the end, disposed of by the same authority that elevated them. Godfrey by having his light removed, Radagon by being absorbed into a mystery that his own body could not survive. And behind both of them, a woman left holding something. Rennala with her eggs sitting on the floor of a ruined academy repeating a lullaby. And on the other side of the same arrangement, Marika, who by the end is a fragment nailed to a tree. I want to be very careful here, because it would be easy to turn this into a story about a wicked queen, and I do not think that is what the game is showing us. Marika is not simply cruel. Marika is trapped in the same machine. Her freedom to refuse the order she serves is not clearly greater than Godfrey's freedom to refuse his exile, and everything she does at the end suggests she spent an age trying to break out of a thing she had built and been built into. The point is not that somebody was evil. The point is that the Golden Order was a machine that ran on people, and it did not distinguish between a war chieftain from the Badlands, a champion from the Lake Country, or a god at the center of its own tree. Every one of them was a component. Every one of them was replaced when the design required it. Grace is not love. Grace is employment. It is true of the first consort, and it is true of the second, and by the end of the story, it turns out to be true of the queen who was handing it out. Sleep well. Next, his children, and who killed them. Chapter 35, Three Sons. Wherever you drifted off to, this is a good place to come back to. Let your breathing slow, and let the bed hold your weight properly. I have been dreading this chapter since the first one, and it is short, because there is not very much to say, and all of it is heavy. Godfrey had 3 sons that the world records: Godwyn the Golden, the firstborn, the beloved, the one who made peace with dragons. Murdered in the night of the Black Knives, soul killed, body still growing in the roots of the tree, Morgoth. Born horned, hidden in the sewer, took a second name, and defended the capital that had disowned him for his entire life. Mohg. Born horned, hidden in the same sewer, went into the dark, found a god of blood, and built a dynasty where he could finally be a lord. Now think about the order of your own game. You arrive in the lands between. You work your way across the country. To reach the capital, you fight through everything the golden world has left. And to get up the stairs and past the tree, you fight Morgoth, the Omen King, on the roof of his own city, and you kill him. Mohg is optional, technically, but almost nobody leaves him alive, because he is holding the second half of the story in an underground palace, and because the game makes it very clear that something needs to be done about what he is doing to Mikola. Godwyn was already dead when you arrived, so you are spared that one. Although if you follow Fia's questline all the way down into the deep, you end up standing over his body doing something to it, and depending on which reading you take, you either give him a kind of rest, or you finish something that was left half done. Then you burn the thorns, you climb to the foot of the Erd tree, and a very large old man in golden armor is waiting for you. He does not know. There is no line, no recognition, no moment where the game lets him find out that the person coming up the hill has killed his children. He calls you a Tarnished, driven by ambition, and he goes to work. I do not think the game is being cruel for effect here. I think it is doing the thing it always does, which is to lay the facts down in the correct order and decline to underline any of them. But it is there, and it is unavoidable, and it is the last piece of the argument. The first Elden Lord went to war for an order that took his children from him twice. It took 2 of them from him at birth, by declaring the shape they were born in to be a curse, and putting them under the city. And it took the 3rd from him in a murder he was not present for, and possibly never learned about. And when he finally came home, the person he met at the foot of the tree was the one who had finished the job. Rest now. Next, the sun on the roof, and a meeting that never happened. Chapter 36, The Sun on the Roof. Wherever you have drifted off to, this is a good place to come back to. Let your breathing slow, and let your hands go soft. There is a sequence in this game that almost nobody assembles, because the 2 halves of it are separated by about an hour of play, and by a very large golden wall. Here it is. You reach the royal capital, and the last thing standing between you and the tree is a horned man on the roof of the city. He is enormous, cloaked, and he fights you with a sword of holy light that he made himself out of nothing but will, because the Golden Order never gave him anything, and he chose to defend it anyway. That is Morgoth, born in the sewer beneath the building he is standing on, denied a name, a place, a face in the histories. He took the second name they gave him, took up the defense of the capital, and killed everything that came for it, for centuries, on behalf of a law that classified him as a curse. You kill him. You have to. He is the gate. Then you burn the thorns, and you climb, and at the foot of the tree there is another enormous figure waiting, in golden armor, with an axe, who tells you that you are driven by ambition and that he intends to put your fire out, father and son. Both of them born outside the categories of the Golden Order. Both of them made themselves indispensable to it anyway. Both of them ended up as the last obstacle standing between an ambitious stranger and the throne of a world that had discarded them. Both of them died doing it, within the same day, in the same city, by the same hand, and they never meet. There is no line, no recognition, no acknowledgement anywhere in this game that the man at the foot of the tree is the father of the man on the roof. Morgoth spends his existence guarding a city that hid him, and dies without his father ever knowing he existed as anything other than an unfortunate birth. Godfrey comes home to a capital he built, walks past the wall his son died defending, and takes up a position a few hundred yards further on to do exactly the same job for the same order. If you want the single cleanest picture of what the Golden Order does to the people who serve it, it is that. A father and a son, unknown to each other, standing as the last two guardians of a law that condemned them both in the same week, in the same city, on opposite sides of a golden wall. Neither of them was ever going to be thanked. Neither of them stopped. Sleep well. Next, the thing on his back, one last time, and what he did to it. Chapter 37. The one he threw away. Welcome back. Let everything slow down around you, and let your hands go soft. I have been circling Soros all night, and there is one last thing to say about him, and it is the least comfortable observation in this whole video. Godfrey was used and discarded, and then, in his final hour, he used and discarded somebody. Soros rode on that back for an age. Whatever he was, gift, leash, or confession, he did his job perfectly. He held the ferocity down. He made the throne room possible. He was the reason a Badlands war chieftain could stand in a golden capital without the clergy fainting. He was, in the most literal sense, the thing that made Godfrey employable, and when the arrangement stopped serving the man wearing him, he was pulled off and thrown into the dirt, and the story never returns to him. He does not get a name in the credits of the fight. He does not get a remembrance. He gets removed at the exact moment his function ended. That is not a criticism of Godfrey. I want to be clear about that, because it would be very easy to turn this into a small moral lesson, and the game is not offering one. It is a description of how this world works, at every level, from the god at the top to the beast on somebody's back. Things are kept while they are useful. When the usefulness ends, they are set aside. The Order did it to the giants, then to the Crucible Knights, then to the Omens, then to its first lord, then to its second. Godric does it to soldiers, one limb at a time. Seluvis does it to people he turns into puppets. Maug does it to a sleeping god. Marika does it to two consorts, and eventually has it done to her. And the man at the center of tonight, who was thrown away by the largest version of this that has ever existed, spent his last 10 minutes doing a small version of it to the creature on his shoulders. I do not think that makes him a hypocrite. I think it makes him a citizen. The horror of the Golden Order is not that it was ruled by a cruel woman. It is that it was a system in which every single participant, including the ones being crushed, learned to treat other beings as equipment. Nobody in this story is outside it. The kindest figures in the whole game are the ones who have opted out entirely and gone to sit in the dark, and even they are usually holding something they cannot let go of. Rest now. Next, the kindest way to read all of this and whether it survives the evidence. Chapter 38. The Kindest Reading. You are still here. Good. Let your breathing slow and let your shoulders come all the way down. I have spent most of tonight building one argument, and it is a hard one. Before we go to the end, I want to build the other one honestly, because I think it might be true, and because you deserve to fall asleep holding whichever of the two feels right to you, rather than the one I happen to prefer. Here is the kindest reading of what happened to Godfrey. She let him go. Consider the queen's position. She is a god, or she is wearing one, and she is trapped inside an order that she built and that has since built her. Every part of the arrangement is closing around her. She has a law she cannot amend, a tree she cannot leave, a body that is beginning to be shared with somebody else, and a set of rules she is required to enforce that have already condemned two of her own children to a sewer. And she has a husband who is not from any of it, a man from outside the map, who did not grow up in the law, who is not a product of the tree, whose whole existence is proof that a person can be enormous and free and entirely unconcerned with golden legitimacy. Under this reading, the light leaving his eyes is not a dismissal, it is an unlocking. It is the one thing she can still do for somebody. She cannot leave. He can. So she takes back the thing that binds him to the order, which is the same thing that gives him status inside it, and the price of his freedom is everything he thought he was. And notice what he does with it. He goes back to his own name. He goes back to his own country. He lives as the thing he was before the lands between ever picked him up, and that exile does not destroy him. It restores him. And when the world falls apart, the only figure in this entire story who is genuinely free to walk back in and act on his own behalf is the one who was thrown out. That is not nothing. That reading has real evidence behind it. There is a version of it that goes further, the one I mentioned in that Exile chapter, where the Tarnished were not discarded but seated, where Marika, already planning the end of her own order, needed a people outside grace, unbound by golden law, capable of standing in front of her and breaking the Elden Ring, and so she made one out of the most loyal servants she had and paid for it with their entire history. If that is true, then Godfrey was not thrown away. He was the first move in a plan to end the world, and he was never told because the plan required that he not be told. I want you to notice something about that, though, before you decide it is a comfort. In every single one of these readings, kind or cruel, deliberate or systemic, one fact is unchanged. Nobody explains anything to him. He is not consulted about his marriage, his name, the beast on his back, the wars, the fate of his sons, or the removal of his light. Even in the most generous version, where the exile is a gift of freedom given by somebody who loved him, it is a gift given by taking something away from him without asking. That is the actual tragedy, and it survives every reading of the facts. Not that he was used. Everybody in this world is used. That he was never once told what for. Sleep well. Next, the man under the armor. Chapter 39. The Man Under the Armor. Welcome back. Settle in properly and let the bed take the whole weight of you. I want to spend a few minutes on who he actually was as a person, because we have spent a long night on his function and there is a man underneath it who is easy to lose. Start with the hands. Almost every powerful figure in this game fights with something that puts distance between them and the world. Sorceries thrown from across a room, incantations called down, great swords with reach, Even his own descendants fight with grafted arms, borrowed limbs, other people's strength stitched on. Godfrey grabs you. At the end, when the ceremony is gone, his answer to the strongest being in the lands between is to take hold of them with his hands, lift them off the ground, and put them into it. There is no distance in that at all. It is the least noble and most personal way to fight that exists, and it is what he chooses when he stops performing. Then look at his face, since he is one of the very few important people in this world who has one on display. No helm, no mask, no veil, no hood, no golden mannequin body. In a game where the central mystery is a woman inside a tree and a man inside the woman. The first Elden Lord walks around with his own weathered face out in the open, and it is the face of somebody who spent his youth outdoors in a hard country. Then look at what he does with ground. He stamps, and the earth reacts. He drives things down into it. He fights like a man who understands that all of this, the tree, the law, the gold, the wars, is finally about who is standing on the dirt at the end. And then look at the one thing he says about himself at the very end, when he has thrown off the beast and dropped the golden posture and has nothing left to protect. He tells you his name is Hoarah Loux and that he is a warrior. That is his self-assessment, delivered in his last minutes with the whole weight of an age behind it. Not lord, not consort, not first of the Elden Lords, not husband of the queen, not father of the golden lineage. Warrior. The job description he arrived with, before anybody in this country had given him anything, and the one he apparently believed was true after everything else had been taken back. What I find quietly devastating about that, and I have been sitting with it for a while now, is that it is not bitter. He does not spit their titles back at them. He does not curse the tree. He simply stops using the golden version of himself and returns to the plain one, and the plain one is enough to make the next Elden Lord fight for their life. He was a man who was very good at one thing, who was loved for it while it was needed, and who was set down when it was not, and who never at any point pretended to be something else in order to stay. There is a kind of integrity in that which the Golden Capital, for all its cathedrals, never managed once. Rest now. Next, what he was owed. Chapter 40. What he was owed. Wherever you have drifted, this is a good place to come back to. Let your breathing go slow and even. So let us total it up, gently, and then put it down. He was brought in from outside to do the violence that a holy order could not admit it required. He did it, comprehensively, across an entire world, for as long as it took, without ever once stepping back. They gave him a name that fit their language, and a beast that made him governable, and a wife who was a god, and a light in his eyes that marked him as belonging. His children became the golden lineage, and 2 of them were put in a sewer for the shape they were born in, by the law he had spent his life making true. And on the day the last enemy fell, the light was taken back, and he was walked out of the country he had built, without a hearing, without an explanation, and without anybody in the entire golden world raising an objection that history bothered to record. He lived out there for an age. He watched everything he built consume itself from a distance. His firstborn was murdered in the capital, and there is no evidence anybody sent word. And when he finally came home, he came home not to take anything, but to stand at the foot of the tree and find out whether the person replacing him was worth the position. That is the whole account, and here's what I think it adds up to. The Golden Order owed him a conclusion, and it never gave him one. It gave him a light and then took the light, and there was no ceremony at either end. That is what makes his story the specific kind of sad that it is. He was not martyred, he was not betrayed in any dramatic way, he was not even hated. He was simply used, and then not needed, and the largest institution that has ever existed in this world had no procedure for what to do with a man in that condition. So it did the administrative thing and removed him from the premises. Grace is not love. Grace is employment. And employment ends. He knew that by the end. I think that is the real meaning of the moment he throws Sarosh off his back. It is a man saying, out loud and with his hands, that the terms were never mutual, and that from this point on, he is going to be the thing he actually is, rather than the thing he was hired to be, and that if anybody wants to take issue with it, they are welcome to come up the hill. The last thing he ever did was refuse to be a component. Sleep well. Next, the Lord you are about to become. Chapter 41. The Lord you are about to become. Welcome back. Let your breathing slow right down and let the bed take everything. There is something waiting on the other side of that fight, and it is worth looking at before we finish, because it turns the whole night around and points it at you. You beat him. You have to continue. And past him there is a golden hall, and inside it a red-haired man who is also a queen, and past that a creature made of light, and past that a throne, and then you become Elden Lord. That is the reward. That is what every hour of the journey was for. You climb over the body of the first man to hold the position, and you take the position. I want to lay the terms out plainly, because we have spent an entire night learning what they are. The lordship is a consort's title, held beside a god, granted through the tree, dependent on an order you did not write. Its function is enforcement. It exists to make a law true by removing the alternatives. The last outsider who took it was given a new name, a beast for his back and a light in his eyes, and when the work was done, the light was withdrawn without a conversation, and he was walked out of the country he had built. And you are about to accept it. Now the game does something remarkable at this point, and it is the reason I do not think this world is as bleak as it looks. It offers you doors. You can mend the ring as it was, and be the lord the order wanted, and let the golden age resume under new management. That is the arrangement continuing exactly as before, with your face on it. You can mend it with one of the alterations you have collected along the way, and be a lord with an argument, changing the law in a specific direction. That is reform inside the building. There is the frenzied flame, which burns the entire arrangement down, including the tree, including the concept, and end the possibility of anybody ever being used this way again by ending everybody. That is the option Vike chose, rather than continue, and it is the only one where nobody gets employed ever again. Or you can go with Ranni. Take the lordship away from the tree completely, out into the dark and the cold, and become consort to a different kind of god, in a world where the law does not sit overhead watching you. That is the door marked out, and it is the one that most directly answers the story we have told tonight, because it is the only ending where the Elden Lord and his god leave the country together, instead of one of them dismissing the other. I am not going to tell you which is right. I have never been able to settle it, and the game very deliberately declines to. What I will say is that Godfrey, at the foot of the tree, in his last minutes, was asking you a version of this question with his hands. He wanted to know whether the next one was worth it. Not worthy in the order's sense, not sufficiently pure or devout or golden. Worth it. Whether the person about to accept the terms had any idea what the terms were. And the answer to that depends entirely on what you do after you walk past his body. Rest now. Next, why this one stays with you long after the game is off. Chapter 42. The Ones Who Are Useful. You are still here. Good. Let everything ease, and let your breathing slow right down. I want to spend a few quiet minutes on why this one lands the way it does, because I do not think it is really about a golden man with an axe. The lands between is full of monsters, and almost none of them are what stays with people. What stays with people is this pattern, which the game runs over and over with different faces on it. Somebody is needed. They are given a place and a name and a light and told they are essential. They do the thing they are good at completely and well for a very long time. And then the situation changes and their usefulness ends, and the same structure that elevated them simply stops including them, without malice, without ceremony, and usually without a conversation. Godfrey, whose light went out when the wars ran out. The Crucible Knights, still standing at their posts in ruins, guarding a doctrine that has moved on without them. The misbegotten, bred as labor. The Albinorics, manufactured and then despised for being manufactured. Serash, thrown into the dirt the moment restraint stopped being required. Renala, a queen with nothing to rule, holding an egg. Morgoth, defending a city that would never say his name out loud. Every one of them did their job. That is the horror at the center of this beautiful golden world, and I think it is why people who have never picked up a controller can feel it when the story is told properly. It is not a fantasy horror. There is no version of it that requires gods or trees or curses. It is simply the oldest arrangement there is, dressed in gold and made enormous, and every one of us has watched some smaller version of it and happened to somebody, or has felt the first cold edge of it happening to us. The reward for finishing the work is that the work is finished. I do not have a consolation for that. The game does not offer one either, and I have come to think that its refusal to offer one is a form of respect. What it offers instead is the accuracy of the account. It goes and finds every person the golden light stopped shining on, and it writes them down. Not as heroes, not as victims, just accurately, in item text, in small letters, where the ones who care enough to look will find them. Somebody kept the record. That is not nothing. That may be all any order ever really owes the people who built it. Sleep well. There is one more chapter, and it is the quiet one. Chapter 43. Sleep well, Chieftain. Wherever you are, whatever hour it has become, you can stop now. It has been a long way tonight. You have stood in a hard country beyond the edge of the map, with a chieftain who had no lineage and no ceremony, only the ongoing fact of himself. You have walked the long march into a golden land that needed exactly one thing from him. You have watched him set down his own name and take up theirs, and put a beast on his back, and go up the cliffs at Stormvale, and into the mountains, and out to every horizon where somebody disagreed with the law. You have met his firstborn, who made peace with dragons. You have stood in the sewer under the Capitol, where 2 more of his children grew up in the dark. You have seen the knights with horns on their armor, still at their posts in ruins, on the wrong side of a line that moved. You have watched the light go out of a man's eyes in a golden room, on the day the last enemy fell, and watched him walk out of the world in the only direction he had ever known how to walk. And you waited with him out there for an age. You have come back through a ruined country with him, past the grafting duke in his own old castle, past the rot, past the drowned academy, up to the foot of the tree. And you have seen him take hold of the thing on his back and throw it away, and say his own name and finish it. That is enough for one night. Let the story stay where it is now. It will keep. Let your shoulders come down. Let your jaw be loose. Let the pillow have the full weight of your head, and let the blanket settle, and let your breathing go slow and quiet and even. Thank you for spending tonight here. Genuinely. It is a long time to give to anything, and I do not take it lightly. I told you at the start that grace is not love, that grace is employment, and we have spent the whole night watching how true that is. But nobody is employing you tonight. There is nothing here that needs you, no law to enforce, no wars left to win, no light in your eyes that somebody can take back, and no work that has to be finished before you are allowed to rest. You can just be the plain version, the one under the armor, the one with your own name on it. The tree is still standing somewhere, out in the dark. The chieftain has put his axe down, and you can put yours down too. Sleep well, and if the golden light never comes looking for you, may you find your own name out past the edge of the map and rest easy under it. Good night.